So welcome everyone. I am Laura Scott with ACTE. I'm the Director for Strategic Partnerships and a proud supporter and member of our Coalition for Workforce Development through CTE. We are very glad to have you with us here for our September meetup. Today, we're going to be reviewing some updates from the Coalition as we prepare for our annual summit, as well as some information on ACTE's event that immediately follows the summit, Career Tech Vision. And we're going to hear from our friends at Advance CTE as they share some updates on their updates to the Career Clusters Framework and other work that they are engaged with. So we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are joining us for your first call, or for those who haven't joined in a little while, we have a refreshed mission that's come out of some strategic planning work that the Coalition is taking on. And so our mission is to support the work of ACTE by helping industry associations connect their members, who we consider business, to career and technical education to achieve a skilled and diverse workforce. And we do have several different working groups that support the Coalition. So we have our advisory council, but we also have work groups focused on marketing and communication who have helped with our rebranded and new website, credentialing, and that work group will be reporting out at our annual summit. We're very excited for that report. One for membership to help recruit and retain members. And then of course, one to plan our annual summit, which is our annual in-person professional development opportunity. I do want to take a second to welcome and say hello to anyone who may be joining for their first call. And I do see several names. So if you are on the call and this is your first time connecting with the Coalition for a monthly meetup, we'd love for you to say hello either over the microphone or in the chat or just with your wave of your hand. So I'm going to stop talking and allow folks to come off mute for a second.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan Belcher, and I am working with two organizations. Was with the National Center for Construction Education and Research, and was an originally founding member of this group, and I'm happy to be back now.
Hi, I'm Glenn Ponis. I'm with Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association Foundation. I represent the aviation industry within the Coalition, and I'm really excited to be here. This will be my third year joining at the summit in Phoenix, and really looking forward to what we can do to continue to move the CTE Coalition forward. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelley Sims. I'm the Director of Workforce Development with the National Apartment Association Education Institute, representing the residential and multifamily housing industry. We offer several credential opportunities and are looking to really make a broader impact in the career and technical education space to introduce individuals into maintenance, leasing, and management professions. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, my name is Brian Levy. I'm with the American School Counselor Association, and we work with K-12 school counselors across the U.S., and I'm happy to be here as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for everyone who's introduced themselves. Over the mic or in the chat, we've got a few people in the chat as well. So glad to have everyone with us this afternoon, and glad to have some new industries represented and new faces on the call today. We want to make sure that everyone on the call is aware of our awesome free resource, our CTE2 Workforce Smart Brief. I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat. So this first one will be to sign up. And then the second one is going to be to share a story. So if you have not yet signed up, we encourage you to sign up. This is a twice-a-month newsletter that comes to your inbox with news features, all focused on successful education and employer partnerships and workforce development initiatives from across the country. We also have an opportunity to highlight successful things that are happening within our Coalition. So if you have a story that you would like to share with us from perhaps your association or one of your member companies, we would love to feature that in an upcoming newsletter. And you can utilize that second link that I put in the chat. Actually, I'm sorry, the second link is also the sign up link. I'm going to try that again. And if not, this will be coming to you in a different format. Yeah, that one doesn't seem to be working. So I'll send it out in a different format. But we would love to get your stories and be able to highlight the good work that you're doing as well. We also do have a LinkedIn page for the coalition, and I've been working to try and add more content to that page and start to add all of our events to that page as well. We would love to have you interact with those posts, share them with your networks so that we can continue to grow our group. So you can go ahead and scan that QR code or utilize the link in the chat. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we do have a still relatively new website that our marketing and communications work group, along with our ACTE staff, have been working hard on. And there is lots of information there, including a new members only resource area. I did send out a newsletter last week that had information on how to access those members only resources with a password. I'll be putting that in the chat later on the call. If you are not able to access with the password, that just means your email hasn't been added to that site yet, and I'd be happy to make that update for you. So you can just send me a quick note to make sure you've got access to that section of the web page. And the area on the website where you would see that is the resources tab. So anything under that resources tab, the membership directory and the resource library are protected for members only. All right, so I'm going to share a little bit about our upcoming events before we hear from Dan and Stacy. And I'm sure, as you all are well aware, we have our 6th annual in-person summit coming up on November 28th and 29th in Phoenix, Arizona at the Hyatt Regency. And we have themed it this year, Ready, Set, Collaborate. We're super excited. Our summit planning committee has been meeting since middle of June to prepare some awesome content for you all, and want to make sure that you know what you have to look forward to. So we're going to have, the target audience for all of our content are our National Trade Association representatives. We would love to welcome anyone else who's passionate about supporting workforce development through connecting with CTE programs as well. We'll have different types of sessions that are designed to allow for networking, collaboration, interaction with one another. We'll also have some time in the agenda for you to get updates from our staff at ACTE around policy and legislative updates that we think are relevant to you and the work that you do, as well as from some of our partners at governmental agencies like Department of Education and Department of Labor. We're also going to bring back our very popular session from 2021, which is our focus on collaborating around challenges. So we're going to have an opportunity for folks to present a challenge to a group and receive feedback in the moment that they can take back with them and implement at their institution. And of course, lots of opportunities to build relationships with folks who may be in a similar role to you, folks who are passionate about improving workforce development outcomes for their industry and building connections for students so that they can have successful and meaningful careers. I'm going to take a quick pause for my colleague Michael Connett to add in a few words.
Hi, Laura. Thank you very much. Well, welcome, everyone. I apologize I'm not on camera. I'm en route to the office right now. I want to thank Laura for the great work that she's been doing with the coalition. She's been upfront in terms of being the strong advocate for all of you with our association. I also want to thank very much for those of you who are new. This is a coalition of active engagement, and so please ask questions, tell us what you need, and collaborate. Get a chance to meet some of the other folks who represent other industries on these meetings. I also want to thank Dan very much, whom you'll be hearing from here in just a moment. Dan from an organization known as Advance CTE. He'll give you a little background on who they are, but they are an extremely strong foundational partner of ACTE's. Lastly, I just wanted to do a shout out to Cheryl Carrier, who's with us from Ford Next Generation Learning, Ford NGL. Ford NGL has been an extremely strong foundational partner with ACTE in this coalition. We look to them for true partnership in all of the activities, and Cheryl and her team have been absolutely wonderful to work with. I don't know if she's going to mention today, but they have a new resource, quite frankly, directed at and for you and your organizations that they'll be releasing here shortly. We're very excited to help promote its availability. As a free resource, you can't do any better than getting the high quality that Ford NGL brings and having free resources. So thank you, and looking forward to hearing from Dan, and looking forward to hearing from all of you and seeing you at the Workforce Development through CTE Summit. Laura, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Cheryl, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And actually, we're going to be having a session at the summit on this, and you'll get the actual resource there. So we're excited to be able to share it with you. And one more thing, Laura, we are looking for organizations to present a successful partnership with CTE programs, youth serving organizations, high school programs. Anyway, if you have a successful program that you'd like to share with everybody else around career exploration, I would love to hear from you, and I'll put my email in this chat, and I can share more detail with you and follow up with more detail. So thank you, Laura.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. And I did drop in the chat during those updates our agenda for the summit, so you can explore what the programming is going to look like in more detail. And then the second link that I dropped in is our registration instructions for how to actually sign up for the summit. So if you're not registered yet, we would love to have you join us, and we hope that you'll be able to be there in Phoenix. I also wanted to make sure that everyone who is considering and planning to attend the summit is aware that it is immediately preceding ACT's Career Tech Vision Conference. Career Tech Vision is our annual show that welcomes educators and others supporting CTE from across the country for 2.5 days of professional development. And it's your opportunity to interact with those important decision makers in the education space. We are hoping to welcome around 4,500 folks to Phoenix, though I'm confident we're going to be closer to the 5,000 person mark. Last year in Vegas, we had 6,000, and that was our 20-year high. We are already on target to have over 260 folks participating in our expo hall. And in addition to that, we'll have workshops and demonstrations happening as well. And we have a lot of content in our concurrent session programming that we do think is very relevant for our coalition participants. There's a lot of focus on business and community partnerships and work-based learning, both areas that many of you are engaged with. I threw in a little bit of information about who our audience is. So of the data collected last year, our largest audiences by position type were our teachers and administrators. We, of course, also do have folks like school counselors, district level staff, and some state and workforce staff as well. And in terms of the institution types represented, the largest portion are going to be from our comprehensive high school, which would be like your neighborhood high school or sending school, and then our local school system. So that would be like the district level staff. We also welcome folks from career tech centers or technical schools, post-secondary institutions, colleges and universities. So we really include a lot of different folks in our audience. And we do have an opportunity that is really well suited to our coalition participants that I wanted to highlight, called our Career Pavilion. The Career Pavilion, Michael has branded as our career fair for educators, for their students. So it's an opportunity for our educator audience to learn about careers in industries that they may not be as familiar with. It will be set up in kiosk style to encourage conversation and engagement, and it's set up right outside of our registration area on the Wednesday before our conference. So our summit will wrap up by 11 a.m. that Wednesday, and Career Pavilion will start at noon. The posters that are presented stay out throughout the rest of our conference, and we also have some other opportunities like learning labs and a video wall for folks who are interested in having some content presented to our attendees on Thursday and Friday as well. And if you have any questions around any of these opportunities, I would be happy to answer them for you. I will make sure to put my email in the chat so that you have that. And with that, I'm going to stop talking for now, and I'm going to turn it over to Stacy and Dan with Advance CTE, who are going to be presenting some updates for you all today.
Everyone, it is very good to be with you. I'm Stacy Whitehouse. I'm a member of the coalition, also on Advance CTE's staff. I will present my slides in just a second, but I'm the Associate Director for Communications. And I've been with the organization for about 3 years and really enjoy, y'all are some of the most committed champions we have for CTE. And so it's always nice to be in the room with y'all and talk to you about the latest things happening. So I will let Dan introduce himself real quick.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Hinderliter. I'm a Senior Policy Associate with Advance CTE. I'm typically focusing on state policy implementation, particularly in support of our state directors. So for those of you who aren't so familiar with Advance CTE, we are a national membership organization for state directors of career tech education and their state staffs. We also have a fall meeting coming up. So if you're curious, you can go to our website and see if you are interested in joining our fall meeting. Yeah, really excited to share some updates with you. We have some really good updates, both about the National Career Clusters framework, and then Stacy will share some updates about some new resources that we've developed and put out over the last few months, few weeks actually, right, Stacy? It's very nascent information coming to you.
Yep.
You might be one of the first groups to hear some of this information. So hot off the press. So we're really excited to be able to share this information. We will have opportunity for question and answer at the end, but if you do have any specific questions about any of the topics that we're going to cover today, feel free to drop those in the chat. And if we can answer them in the chat, we'll try to, but if not, we'll just save them for the very end.
And we want to say we have a lot going on in our organization. And so we tried to pick some topics that we felt were best aligned to what you're facing in your work as industry partners, and information that you can use in your work. But we also want to hear your feedback of how can we help you be more involved in this work. If you want to, how can you use the resources that we provide and talk about today? So your feedback is very much appreciated and encouraged. We do not want to just talk at you. So I'll let Dan do the first part, and then I'll do the second 2 items.
All right, thanks, Stacy. So the first big update that we have is around the National Career Clusters framework. So if you're not familiar with the National Career Clusters framework and kind of its general purpose, the National Career Clusters framework organizes career technical education nationwide, particularly into career clusters. There are currently 16 career clusters and 79 embedded career pathways. And then they were originally created about 20 years ago. And so they have long lived their useful life. And so we are embarking on a process right now to update the National Career Clusters framework to better reflect the current and future world of work. So we started this process a couple of years ago, put the initiative on pause for a little bit, and then recently restarted the process in late 2022, to really better understand how we can use the National Career Clusters framework to better create this common language between industry and education. What we heard from a lot of our members and a lot of the field that we talked to was really that education and the workforce were talking past each other in a lot of these conversations, in a lot of conversations about alignment, in a lot of conversations about partnership. So we really wanted to make sure that as we were redeveloping the National Career Clusters framework, that it could be this common language and really serve as this bridge between industry and education, both K-12, post-secondary, and adult CTE ed. So one of the big kind of cornerstone pieces is that we really want to make sure that every learner who has access to CTE, and we want every learner to have access to CTE, so really every learner, to be able to use the Career Clusters framework to explore, decide on, and then prepare for careers of their choosing in the dynamic and evolving workforce. We know that the world of work is rapidly changing, and we know that a framework like the Career Clusters can't be everything to everyone, but we do want to make sure that it is reflective of the way that the world of work is moving and reflective of the way that industry is moving their specific sector forward. So one of the big things that we did was we first stood up a national advisory committee that's made up of CTE directors, both current and former state CTE directors, a representative from the career technical student organizations, some workforce development experts, as well as some other national nonprofit leaders, to really serve in this advisory capacity to make sure that we were headed in the right direction with every decision that we're making around the career clusters framework. The other thing that we started was that we stood up these industry advisory groups. And the industry advisory groups are not meant to signal what the future of the career clusters framework would be, but rather to get a sense of how each industry area is really facing current challenges, both in recruitment and retention of new employees, to make sure that learners who are entering into that particular sector are prepared with the technical and academic skills they need to be successful in that sector, and to really make sure that the career clusters that we design in partnership with our contractors, Indigo Education and WestEd's Center for Economic Mobility, really are reflective of the needs of that particular sector. So currently we've stood up 12 industry advisory groups, and we got about 300 nominations or so for those 12 groups. But we are still looking for some particular representation. I'm not going to go through every single one because that would take more time than we have. But if you go to the website that you see there, careertech.org/the-framework, and we can drop that link in the chat as well. You can go to that link and find out all the information that we have publicly available about this initiative, including the members of the National Advisory Committee and the members of those industry advisory groups. So if you look through that list of those industry advisory groups and you see your sector or your particular area is not well represented on those industry advisory groups, by all means, reach out to me. Like I mentioned, we are still looking for potential participants to still help out on those groups. Those groups will be running through early 2024. It's 2 hour-and-a-half long workshops and then an offline validation of a new framework. So if you are interested in participating in that process or joining in the process that's already started, by all means, reach out to me, shoot me an email. The other thing that I will just let you all know is that we are continuing to do additional other stakeholder engagements over the course of the next few months. This is going to include some workshops with our membership to really understand the implementation needs from the state level. We're going to be doing some focus groups with local educators, as well as national organizations, as well as CTSO representation, ACTE's board of directors, some other national CTE leadership, to really make sure that the National Career Clusters framework can be updated and modernized in a way that's reflective of the field as a whole, while making sure that it still aligns with the needs of industry as well. We're going to be doing some national surveys as well. There's some other things. So there's a lot of work that's happening on this initiative. We're really doing our best to be as transparent as possible. So for that reason, we're sending updates about this initiative about every 6 weeks or so, to really make sure that the field and those who are interested in following along in the process have as much information about the initiative as they possibly can. So the best way to get those updates is by signing up for our newsletter. So if you go to our website, at the very top, you'll see a thing to sign up for our newsletter. There is a checkbox for the career clusters. Whenever we send out an initiative update about the career clusters, we always send it out to that listserv first. So if you are interested in getting the most recent updates about what's going on with the career clusters, that newsletter is the best way to get those updates as we go along. So with that, I'll just take a quick pause. I didn't see any comments or questions kind of flying through the chat, but if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in there. I can also drop in my email address in case you want to shoot me a quick email. There you go. And then if we have any lingering questions, we can answer those at the end. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to Stacy.
And I'll give everyone a second to see if anybody has any questions. Feel free to raise your hand. We really, during this process restart, one of our biggest priorities was to make sure that this was industry informed. So I really do encourage you that this is probably a lot to take in. I know some of you may be hearing about this for the first time potentially. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us after this meeting once you've had a chance to think about things and look at the lists and things like that, because we do want to keep y'all engaged, and y'all are already champions of CTE. You understand the structures, and so you are especially valuable in helping us navigate this process. So any questions?
I will say, Stacy, looking through the list of people who are on the call today, there are people who are already part of the industry advisory groups. So I'm glad to see some of those names fly through. But if you are interested and you didn't hear about it before, but are still curious, if we need people for your sector, definitely reach out to me.
Right. Seeing none, I will move on to the next section. So the next couple of sections are going to be talking about kind of how we talk about CTE and CTE's footprint. The first one is kind of like just something I think y'all might find interesting. And our newest release, we literally released it 2 days ago. And the next thing after that is much more something that's behind the scenes, but something I think y'all should be aware of and see how it applies to your work. So, and thanks, Michael. Dan put the link to the newsletter form in the chat. So we do a state of CTE report most years. We are on our 8th state of CTE report, and that kind of takes a topic that's emerging or we realize the field needs more information on. We do kind of a deep dive into that topic. And so we've been hearing a lot from states that they are exploring how their funding works and whether they want to make potential changes. And there is a recognition that there, A, has not been a ton done about this recently, and 2, that states didn't really have easy access to understand what's happening across the country. Hence what led to our state of CTE, which is our 50-state landscape report. So you can click on these to watch later. We decided to release this in the form of a report website, which does have resources that go more in depth. And we also have an explainer video that if you want to get the overview of how to navigate the site and what each of the resources are, because I won't go a ton into that today, you can watch the explainer video and it's pretty quick and it just walks you through each section on the website. Deborah, I see your question in the chat. Not that I'm aware of. That is an interesting concept. I will say last year was the first year that we got new CAR data, which is the Consolidated Annual Report, which is what's required under the Perkins Act. It was the first data that we got under Perkins 5. And so we're still kind of digesting all of that. And it's probably going to take another round of data for us to truly see where growth is going. The good news out of that data was that CTE enrollment stayed steady throughout the pandemic, when obviously in a lot of education that wasn't the case. So that's really good news. I don't know if that could be a next step. I think partially what I'll say here is CTE funding is so complicated, and growth in CTE enrollment is really based on
Carl Perkins has some information on projected cluster growth possibly that I've seen. But I'll have to go find that again, because it seems like they had something, Carl Perkins data, whatever site that is. Had
the PCRN.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's an interesting concept. Frank, I'll have to follow up with you on that one as well. I don't know that there's a specific organization that's doing that kind of mapping. I haven't seen anything from the Department of Ed about population projections.
I can reach out to Octane too. You know me, I'm going to ask everybody the questions about non-native English speakers and adults.
Yes, adult learners.
Every meeting, both populations. So
yeah, I know anecdotally we're seeing people more and more that there is demand. I think what we're also seeing is if states have to look long-term at what their program growth is, and sometimes the demand for the programs is coming up against what the state, how fast a state or a locality is able to expand them. So as we all know, sometimes like the true growth is not truly indicative, because if you can't expand the programs fast enough, then you can't put people in them. So you can only fill the seats that you have. So I know something we are trying to actively collect is what states have waiting lists and things, so we can continue to make the argument of the demand is there, and that's why we need more funding. So all great questions. And Frank, if you do hear back from Octane, let me know, but I'll follow up with our leadership and see if there's something that I'm not aware of in regards of projections. But these are the two kind of starting points for this research. And as I mentioned, there had not been a lot done on secondary CTE funding. And Frank, maybe one day down the road, we'll do post-secondary and adult, but that's extremely, we would have to start from scratch on that. Whereas this one, there was some research done 10 years ago that we partnered with Department of Ed and RTI on. And so we were able to use that as a starting point to do an update on that report. And so this is sort of a 50-state landscape of how states are funding their models. And I'll show you in a couple of slides that there are some basic structures that states use. We also did case studies that kind of do a deep dive, which the 2014 research did not, of like, what's an example of how these structures are actually coming to life. And then one other thing that was new was our organization is very committed to equity and access, and funding is a major pillar of how that happens in CTE programs. And so there's still a good amount of work that needs to be done on how funding structures can be developed to expand access to all learners, including special populations, and removing barriers to participation. So we included some recommendations based on looking at the structures and doing interviews with state directors and those sorts of things on how equity can be advanced in the existing funding models. So this was done based on a national online survey of state directors, and then we did some in-depth interviews with state directors to try to gain more information and what informed our case studies. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I did want to provide some basics, and the website goes through this in more detail. But there are 3 basic funding models that are used to fund secondary CTE, and this was outlined in the 2014 report, but that didn't go into detail on what states have what models. And the next slide will show there's certain approaches for one of these models. And so we did like the deeper dive of where are these models showing up in states. So these are the 3 basic models for secondary CTE funding. The most popular is the middle one, the categorical model, in which the funding goes from the state level to LEAs, and there's a variety of ways that the LEAs, the local education agencies, decide to use them. And so this slide shows for that particular model, there's several ways in which local agencies can use them. They can do it based on students. They can do it based on units like equipment or transportation or instructors, like the different pieces of a program, or they can do it cost-based, just based on what certain costs are to deliver the programs. And that's done through like a reimbursement process. So how we use this information is, again, 10 years later, we did a deeper dive on what states are using this, what's in their legislation, on how it's structured. And then we did a case study for each of these approaches, which you'll see on the website, is Texas, Massachusetts, and North Dakota, on how this is applied in real life and some changes they'd like to make or recommendations or things like that. So that was kind of how we took the 2 educational, but also what is the real life application of this research. So some cool stats that I think y'all would be interested in based on this report was, the good news is funding continues to increase at the state level for CTE, which is great news for y'all's partnerships. It increased by an average of 182 million in 27 states over the past 10 years. There was quite a range on the increases. I think the lowest was like $37,000, and then it was multiple billions of dollars in Texas, actually. So there was quite a range in how much there was an increase, but the fact that there's a 182 million increase on average is really encouraging. We also looked at what is the total increase, and we didn't hear from every state, so I will just name that when you go on the website, that depending on a certain type of funding model, or if we didn't hear from the state, we can't have an actual number. So this is higher, but not markedly higher. But I will say there's at least $6 billion being dedicated to secondary CTE funding, which is great. But I will say, in talking to someone who's doing some research/writing on this subject, they reminded me that this is barely, if you combine this and federal funding, it's barely 5% of the total federal education budget as a whole. So in terms of what CTE as an investment is getting, we still have a ways to go. As I mentioned, the categorical funding model is the most popular. It is in 23 states. And then we also asked people about how are you using funding to increase access and equity and access. And 65% of state directors that responded reported using funds for specifically that purpose. We'd obviously love to see it higher. So that is also what led us to give some recommendations. And yes, Steve, ACT is a wonderful partner with the action alerts and things that they do to try to increase our federal funding. And you all, with your stories and success stories, are a huge part of making that happen. So I will say, and I know y'all do advocacy on the state level too, and your members do it. So the numbers that are on this page are in part thanks to the work that you all are doing. So I know I dumped a lot on y'all about what this is. And so I did want to say, how do you use this exactly? If I go and like wander around the website and the report, how exactly may I use this? And so you all probably have more ideas, and I would welcome that because you are the first group that has been presented to about this work since the release. So if you have ideas on how you think industry could use this, I'd love to hear it. But I put some ideas here of, I think your members might be interested in how funding is happening in their state, and you can get it from a basic level on the cool map that we have there, or there's a state-by-state table that goes into a lot more detail. It links actual legislation and policy documents on there. So if you want to do a deep dive, if you're in a state and you're trying to figure out how you can get more funding, you can do a lot more of a deep dive. And then just to increase understanding, I know a lot of you are trying to figure out how do you keep funding for your programs? How do you expand funding for your programs? So just even sharing the executive summary with your team members and with your members can help increase basic understanding of how funding works. The top finding that we put in this report was that funding is varied and complex, and that is so that, and this is the secondary level, like that doesn't even scratch the surface of post-secondary or adult. So our ultimate goal is that we want to help you use this information to expand funding when possible, and then we hope to support states in building better funding structures and improving equity and access in those funding structures. So that's kind of the goal with this report. So I will stop there before I move on. Josh, to your point in the chat, it is up an average of 182 million over the last 10 years. I'll have to go look and see what the old amount was for 2014. I think it's in that table. So I don't know about 20 years ago, but it's definitely a significant increase from 10 years ago. And we can only, obviously I'm not really talking about federal funding. That's very readily available of like how Perkins is doing. And that's kind of slightly increased, but kind of stagnant. State funding, we can really only get that information by asking the states, because funding is so complex. They're the ones who know the actual state funding that they're getting. So This report is like the only data we have from the last 10 years about state funding because we sent the survey out to ask them. So unfortunately, outside of that and the report that was done 10 years ago, there's not a ton of other data out there about state funding itself. And obviously that's not even scratching the surface on local funding, which some localities we know like New York and probably communities in California have huge local funding, but most other areas, they rely on the state for their funding. Frank, yes, there has not been, I think when they come back from recess, it's going to be part of the negotiation package as to what moves forward and what doesn't. And obviously the potential government shutdown is wrapped up in all of that. So yes, I'm sure you will see action alerts and things like that to try to push back. And we've been pretty vocal that anything that cuts workforce development also hurts CTE. So I see the chat going back and forth about newsletter things, so I'll let that play out. But any questions about the site? I know some of you may be tooling around with it as I've been talking, but any questions about this report? And thank you for all the questions, because I think that gives us, we definitely add on our wish list of ideas and directions to go in with this research in the future, because I'm sure we'll do another one at some point. Michael, are you on the PCRN website? Or are you on our state of CTE site? I'm not really sure which webpage
I'm on
you're
your state CTE site. I'm on your.
Okay, the map, like the 50 state map that's on there.
No, I stumbled into your state comparison.
Oh,
section.
gotcha. Yep. Are you talking about recommendations for improving that split?
Well, it's probably very subjective what improving would mean, right? Some people would have different opinions on that. But I'm just curious if this is a topic that's being addressed or talked about. I brought it up to the USDOE a number of times as maybe something they could, at a minimum, be more aggressive with in terms of asking the question and making a recommendation or something. But with the expansion of going down to, 5th grade or whatever, and now some schools, even in Georgia, we're doing more even at the elementary school level, purely from a number standpoint, the number of students that you're trying to support at the secondary and elementary level, numbers wise, is much, much greater than what you're trying to support at the post-secondary level. And I happen to live in a state that's 50-50, and I'm jealous of the average being 64-36.
Oh, okay. Because I will say, I mean, I don't know that we're doing specific recommendations, because I would say one thing we have to be careful of is we probably have I don't want to say a third, but we have a number of states whose serving agency is post-secondary. So they are going to want the number to be higher in their state in order to better serve those students. So I can't say that we're making recommendations to try to get it closer one way or the other. What we do really try to push is the alignment and how secondary and post-secondary can better share resources, basically. So even if the funding on paper is not there, the collaboration is there, so that you can say the funding's going one way, but it should be kind of flowing together, so it's not as kind of siloed. So I get where you're coming from, but we have to be careful on that. And I will say, obviously, there's, as you just saw from this report, there's a lot of state funding on top of any federal funding that, as we can see, is going to secondary. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, but we kind of have to thread the needle on that. So I will turn it back over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you, Dan. Super important and relevant content for this group. And I know, I'm sure folks wish that we had more time to dig into a lot of that, especially the perceptions issues. I'm going to put a few final links and reminders in the chat. Our next meetup is going to be our in-person summit in November. So remember, November 28th and 29th, Phoenix, Arizona. We hope to see you there. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is in the chat there. And I just want to say thank you again to Advance CTE, and thank you to everyone for being here today. Great to have you all with us.